All right, we are ready to go. Welcome. I think I just want to make sure that we're streaming into the Healthy Kitchen Blueprint group, since that is how most are going to be watching this today. But if you have the link for the Zoom room, come on in. Let me just post it into our group here. Zoom room link. All right. There we go. Hey, Chloe, come get the dog, please. All right. I see we have a few participants in the Zoom room. I'm going to get started and stream into our Healthy Kitchen Facebook group. Well, this will live as a recording. Let me just make sure we're up and going here. While I'm doing that, you all should have received an email with your Sourdough Studio package. So go ahead and grab that or print it if you haven't done that yet. Send it to printer. It'll be a little bit easier as we go through the class today. If you have it right in front of you, just because I'll be taking you through various stages of sourdough. Okay, so I see we have most people watching from the Facebook group, but what I want to start off with is just get a feel for how many of you have actually worked with sourdough before. So if you have, just drop in the chat here if you've ever worked with sourdough, or if this is your first time going through this and learning it. And I want to keep us on a bit of a tight schedule because we are going to have sourdough going at 3 different stages. So I'm going to do my best to keep everything moving in the right direction. I taught this class as a live in-person class last weekend, was it? Yeah, last weekend. And it went really well. So it was fun. We actually made it through the flow and we got to enjoy bread after. I wish we could all be sitting around my kitchen enjoying bread after, but we'll just pretend for today. Okay, so yes, introduce yourself in the chat if you're in the Zoom room or over on Facebook. And let us know if you've ever used sourdough before. If you do have your package that I sent you, go ahead and have that in front of you or send it to printer. Hey, Charlotte, because I can see you. Can you hear me okay? Hi, honey. Okay, great. I know you've been working with sourdough. Okay, so what I want to do for the first 15 minutes or so is just give you a quick overview of how today's class is going to go. I think we're going to probably finish around 3:30, 3:45, depending on your questions. I want to take you through just a quick overview of the package. And then we're going to start by talking about our starter, which is the foundation of your bread. And then I have bread ready to go at 2 different stages. So what I've done is I do have bread here that has been bulk fermenting on my counter since probably about 7, maybe 8 a.m. this morning. So I live in Florida, and something I want to stress throughout the workshop today is if you live in a warmer climate, or most of you probably have summer going on right now, which means your kitchen is going to be a little bit warmer than it might be other times of the year. And when that is the case, you need to change your recipes somewhat to reduce the amount of hydration in them. So the other thing you'll notice is your bread will ferment and rise a lot quicker than it will in colder climates or in the winter season. Can you grab the dog, honey? So what you see here might not be typical if you live somewhere that's a little bit colder. What's happened here is I started this dough at around 8 a.m. this morning. So that's about 6 hours ago. And you can see, you might not know it by looking at it yet, because maybe you're just getting started in this world, but it has certainly doubled in size. You see a lot of bubbly action going on there. I'll flip over to my starter for just a moment, because one point I want to emphasize to you guys is the activity that happens in your starter is the same activity that's going to happen in your dough. So this elastic that you see here, when I built my dough this morning for class today, I fed my starter because in about an hour, we're going to build a brand new dough, because I want to take you through what that looks like using this starter. And this elastic is a demarcation to show where the starter was at this morning at 8 a.m. And you can see it, in fact, has doubled in size. right? You can see all the bubbles going on there. What has just happened here is what will be replicated in the dough. So this is point number one. I want to make sure you write down in your notes. Your bread, the rise that you have in your bread, and ultimately what you bake in your oven, that nice spring that you have, that nice rise in your loaf, will only happen if your starter has done the same thing before you use it. So what happens here will happen in your bread. These mimic each other. Now, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. We're going to go through the starter in a second, but if I was to leave this on my counter for another 2 or 3 hours in this warm kitchen environment, you would start to see the levels start to drop. They would start to reverse down towards the elastic again, which means the activity is starting to go dormant, which means if I was to use this in like 2 hours to build bread, my bread would not rise very well because I've just lost the height of the activity. So you always want to use your starter right around the time it has doubled in size. So we will come back to that, but there's certain things throughout the class that I want to make sure I'm replicating for your own remembering, and that is one of those things. Okay, so as I said, we're going to come back to this dough. We're going to pop it in the oven in probably about 30 minutes before we start another fresh batch, and I take you through the whole process. Grab your package for me and let's turn. So I'll just go through the first few pages, and then once we get our dough going in a little bit, I'll go through the remainder of the package. So on page 1, I've given you some QR codes there. There's a link to my sourdough shop where I have all of the things that you're going to be seeing me use today. I've linked up for you just to make it simple. I've also linked for you all of my sourdough recipes, which I store in a database called Plan to Eat. I know many of you here use that because over the years we've talked about it in different programs. But and one thing you'll notice in this printout package is I did type out the most popular sourdough recipes that you will use. Okay, so they're there for you as well. So that's page 1. So I want you to go to page 2, where you see starter. What did I call it? Starter startup. So let's talk about your starter. Now, before you begin sourdough, there are 3 ways you can access a starter. So way number 1, got a belt missing a loop here, 1 second. Method number 1 for getting a starter would be to get one from a friend. So if you lived nearby here, I would put a little bit of my starter in a jar for you and send you home to take care of it like a child. Okay. And I should say this is your child now. What you are going to start growing in your kitchen will take almost as much love and remembering and nurturing as your children. So if you are planning to be a very active sourdough baker, meaning you might make a loaf every week or twice a week, and then you get into doing other things like tortillas and pizza crust and pancakes and muffins and all those things, you really will not, if you don't want to, you will not need to buy any bread-related products anymore. So this will, if you're planning to get really into the sourdough lifestyle, you will want to be thinking about your starter at least once a day and feeding it once a day, okay? So again, the first way you're going to get starter is from a friend. And it's pretty cool. There are some people that have had starters in their family for generations. Their great grandmothers used the starter that they are now using in their own kitchen. I think that is so cool. I did not have that opportunity. I wish I did. Hopefully I can keep mine going for my own grandchildren one day. But anyway, think of your social circle and who might have a starter they can give you. That would be the first way. The second way would be to buy it. So I have linked for you on Amazon a pre-made sourdough starter that will come to you in activated form, and you need to put it in a jar as soon as you receive it and feed it, okay? Those 2 ways are the easiest ways. The third way would be to make your own starter. Now, I've given you detailed steps on this page for doing that, and this might be what you guys want to get started on this week. So you might, because this is the whole process of creating a starter takes about 5 days. So the process is there for you. And honestly, even if you have a working starter, maybe you have found that over time it has started to fall a little bit flat. It's very hard to wreck or kill your starter. I will say that. So even if you think it's lost some of its life force, don't stress. you can probably bring it back to life just with some food and water, flour and water over the course of a few days. But maybe you want to go through the steps to make your own starter. It does require a little bit of pineapple juice just to get it going, and then basically just flour and water. And you watch it over the course of 5 days. So I gave you the detailed instructions on that first page. But let's talk about starters for a moment. So right now I'm going to grab what I call the discard jar from my fridge. And this is something you will likely keep as well. You'll always have a jar in your fridge. And the reason we have discard is because if you are keeping your starter on your counter, let's say you're planning to use it quite regularly, like every other day or maybe every day, you will want to take some of your starter away every day before you feed it fresh flour and water. And the reason we do that is because we want to, it's kind of like trimming the dead leaves off of a houseplant, right? If you trim away the dead, it helps more of the living grow. And this is what we're looking to do with our starter. So basically, every day you would keep just enough starter to use in your recipes, and every recipe will require different amounts. The reason I have so much in here is because we're going to be making the master double loaf recipe in about 30 minutes. We're going to make that dough. And so I actually need 260 grams of starter. So that's why we have so much here. And I just grew this morning from a very small amount just by adding enough flour and water. Okay. So typically you want to keep maybe around 80 grams total of starter in your jar on your counter, to which you can always grow more by adding to it. Here's the second point I want you to write down. You're never, ever going to use your entire starter in a recipe, because if you did that, you wouldn't have anything left to regrow starter. So you're always going to leave, even if it was just like half an inch at the bottom of your jar, that's enough to keep it growing to support future recipes. So having said that, let's say you're going on vacation for a couple weeks, or maybe you just want to bake once a week and you don't want to have your starter out on the counter. That's where I started. That's where most of you want to start, because otherwise it might get a little bit overwhelming trying to feed your starter every day. And you're pulling some of your starter out and putting it in your discard jar in the fridge and giving it a fresh feed every day. It can be a lot of work if you're not planning to actually do anything with it. So one of the things you'll find in your package I gave you was a sample schedule if you're just going to be baking once a week, let's say on the weekends. That's where I started a few years ago. Every weekend, I would, on a Thursday, I would pull my starter out of the fridge. And let me clarify something. You'll have your discard jar, which is deactivated starter. So this is starter that's fallen flat, but you're keeping it in a jar in the fridge, because you can use this in any recipes that call for discard, meaning recipes that don't really require your end product to rise at all. So things like tortillas, or even more of a flatbread style pizza, or muffins, or even pancakes. You'll see I have recipes in your package. You'll see lots of recipes online that call for just discard. So you'll have your discard jar in your fridge always that you're adding to when you're giving your actual starter a fresh feed. And then you'll have your starter, which you might also keep in the fridge because you don't want it to keep growing. You want it just to stay healthy and ready to use when you need it. And the activity level between your starter that you keep in the fridge versus your discard jar is a little different. This one is a lot more flat. Your starter that you would feed, like a few hours before you pop it in the fridge, it's going to have a little more activity going on in it. It'll be quicker to reactivate when you need to use it in a recipe. So let me come back to the schedule you'll find in your notebook. Let's say on a Thursday, you pull your starter out of the fridge because you're not keeping it on your counter because you're not using it every day. And so that buys you time. You'd pull it out on a Thursday, you'd give it a feed of equal parts flour and water. You might do, and let me just say, you're going to want to get a scale. If you don't have one yet, you'll be using a scale all the time when you're measuring your sourdough, and you would just put your starter on there and you would tare it, and then you would add maybe 30 to 40 grams of flour and 30 to 40 grams of water, equal parts, and just give it a fresh feed. That's how you would keep your starter active and going. So let's say you pulled your starter out of the fridge on a Thursday because you want to have bread either Saturday or Sunday. So you would give your starter a fresh feed on Thursday, equal parts flour and water. And you, Friday morning, you would give it another feed because you want to make sure you're getting some really good bubbly action going on. And the day you pull your starter out of the fridge, it's going to be a little bit flat. So you probably want to give it 2 feeds before you actually use it. So let's say Friday morning, now you're giving it a second feed. By Friday night, it will definitely have risen. Now, again, if you live in Florida or somewhere really hot, you might not want to give it that feed until like noon, because your goal might be that Friday night, overnight, you're creating the starter that you're going to use in your bread dough Saturday morning. And you want to make sure that you catch it at the top of its peak anytime you're planning to use it. So you could risk it and pull it out of your fridge Thursday, give it a feed. Friday, maybe you don't feed it until Friday night because your kitchen's really warm. And because then you know Saturday morning it will have for sure doubled in size, and that's what you would use in your bread. You would essentially have this amount because you're using that much in your bread recipe, which you'll see it calls for the amount of leaven that you use there. Leaven, by the way, is another way of saying starter. It's basically an offshoot of your starter, and it is simply your starter that you've set aside for a specific recipe. So again, we'll look at the schedule once we've done all of the stages, but that might be something you come into a routine of. Is on Thursdays, you take your starter out of the fridge, you give it a feed, you give it another feed on Friday, you build your dough on Saturday morning, and then it bulk rises all day Saturday. You pop your dough in the fridge Saturday night, and then you bake it Sunday morning or Sunday evening. You could even bake it Saturday evening. You don't necessarily have to put it in the fridge. So we're going to go through all of that in stages. And if this feels a bit overwhelming, just keep your recipes in front of you as we're going, because I'm going to talk through each step. Okay, so let me just see if you had any questions. Does the discard expire ever? Like, should you start a new discard jar to ensure you use the older stuff? I mean, not really. Your discard could happily be in your fridge for a couple of months, but it probably won't ever last that long because you're really just taking about half of your active starter and putting it in your discard jar, which means, you know, if you're doing that only once or twice a week where you're actually using your starter to bake, and that's when you're pulling from it and putting into your discard jar before you bake with it, it would take quite a while to even get, you know, this amount of discard. And a muffin recipe made with discard, for example, which I put in your package, it uses almost a cup of discard. So you probably won't have that issue of it expiring, but it can definitely last a couple of months. Alrighty, so what I want to do is, and so we've covered off some starter basics. If you go to, there's a page called Refreshing Your Starter. You can give that a scan. That's basically what I just went through, which talks about feeding your starter to keep it healthy and active, which again is simply giving it fresh flour and water every day. And you can only give it a little bit. You could just give it a couple of teaspoons of both if you weren't planning to really use it in a recipe. But like I said, every recipe will tell you exactly how much starter you're needing. So pop quiz, if a recipe is telling you you're going to need 100 grams of starter, what do you want your total starter weight to be when you're building the starter that you're going to use in this recipe? And this is a kind of an approximate number. There's no accurate answer here, but I am looking for, yes, Christine, that would work perfect. So what Christine did there was she doubled the amount that she needed, because Christine remembers she doesn't ever want to use her entire starter in a recipe. So if Christine did that, that means she would have 100 grams left over after she used the 100 grams for her recipe. And that's what she would then feed with some fresh flour and water. Christine could have also done maybe around 150 grams if she knew she didn't want to have so much starter left over after she made her bread recipe. Okay, good job, Christine. So refreshing your starter, there's a page right there on how you're going to do that. But what I want to do right now is I want to start building our dough. Okay, so there's several different recipes you can use for bread. One of the recipes I included in your package is a sandwich loaf recipe, which is going to bake more like your standard square sandwich loaf. That's what I make a couple times a week. Actually, I have one here, which bakes up a little different than your artisanal bread. Okay, this is more of a cuttable bread, something that you would use for your kids' sandwiches for school. This is actually a really easy recipe. You'll find in your notes package. It's an overnight build. The dough all rises overnight while you sleep, and then you just pop it in the oven. It doesn't need any massaging and stretching and folding, and it's very easy. I would even say after class today that might be the first recipe you make. It's called the sandwich bread recipe. But what we are going to do today is your classic artisanal sourdough. What you guys see if you go to a bakery, the nice round with the crispy crust that we score, right? So we're going to get a little more involved here. So turn to this page, have this in front of you so we can follow the recipe together. So what we're going to start with is our scale. Now, normally, so I only have one of these glass mixing bowls that goes on my stand mixer, but because I used this already today, and we're going to take this out and stretch it out and bake it, I have a backup mixing bowl that unfortunately you can't see through, but I'll just portion it out and explain what I'm doing. So what I'm beginning with is let me tilt my camera down a little bit here. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my bowl on my scale, and I'm going to tare it so that it has no weight. And we're using the grams measurement. I have this exact scale linked up in the Amazon shop if you're wanting something like this. It's nice. It's waterproof. It's pretty good to go. So what you see here first is we need 400 grams of water. Now, this recipe that we're going to make here is going to make 2 nice artisanal loaves. You could divide this in half if it's just you at home, or you and your husband, your boyfriend, your whoever, your roommate. If it's just a few of you in a home, you might not want to make 2 loaves. However, I also find even if it was just my husband and I around for a couple of days, I would still do 2 because I love to put one in the freezer, or I'll give a gift to a neighbor or a friend. So I like to always work off. If you're going to do all the work, double the recipe. I love doing that with all recipes. If I'm making a chili, I never just make enough for that night. I double it and I freeze half of it. So that's just another tip you might want to write down. This is why this is a double loaf. So the first part of our recipe calls for 400 grams of water. So I'm going to go grab some filtered water. You want to use filtered water or distilled in your recipe. And if you guys have any questions, pop them into the chat as we go. Okay, so I'm measuring this out into my bowl, 400 grams. Probably going to need to fill this a little bit more. Yep. You want to be pretty accurate. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you live in a warmer environment, if your kitchen is running kind of warm, you're going to want to use less water in your recipes. That's called low hydration. This recipe I'm giving you here is a lower hydration recipe, which means when we mix it with the flour, it's going to be pretty stiff and dense. The reason I don't want to add more water to it is because in a warmer kitchen, your bread is going to ferment a lot quicker. And if I had more water in this recipe, perhaps the type of hydration that a typical blogger might put online for a sourdough recipe, my bread would turn almost like soupy because my kitchen's so warm. So I'm sharing that with you because if, hands up for those that I can see on camera, are you in a warmer environment right now? Is your kitchen running a little bit warmer? Yes. Okay, perfect. This is the recipe you want to use. In the winter, you might want to use anywhere between 450 grams of water to 500 grams of water. You might want to give it a little more water because that's going to help it along. It does not need help in a warmer kitchen. Okay. So 400 grams of water. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add our starter or our leaven. Same thing. Our leaven, this is what we created for our bread recipe. Now I'm looking for two things here. So first, I'm double checking to make sure this has doubled in size. And I used an elastic just to show you guys that yes, this is where it started at 8 a.m. this morning. And now it has doubled in size. It is at the perfect time for us to use it. And I did time that out for this class, right? So what I did was I thought, okay, we were having class at 2 o'clock. I want to make sure by 2 o'clock that I catch my starter right at its peak where it's doubled. So that's why I started this around 8, because I know my kitchen and I know it only takes 6 to 7 hours for it to do that. If I was living in Canada in the winter, I would probably want to give this 12 hours to double in size. Okay. You'll get to know your kitchen. Every kitchen's a little different, but what you're looking for is that it has doubled in size. The second thing I'm looking for is that it passes what we call the float test. The float test is simply once you drop your, let me see if I can show this to you. I don't know if I will be able to at the camera angle. I've got my water in here. Yeah, it's a little tricky. I wish this was clear. But what I'm looking for is that when I pour this in, make sure I teared it, that this floats right on top of the water. So I'm going to show you how thick this is. This is absolutely floating. It's not sinking to the bottom. I can tell it's going to do that just because of how thick it is as I'm pouring. Okay, that is the consistency you want in your starter. So I'm measuring out right now 260 grams of our active leaven or starter, same thing, same word. And I'm keeping in mind that if all works out here, I should hit my 260 and I should have enough left over to continue my starter life. Okay, here we go. Perfect, 260. This is how much is left at the bottom of the jar. There's maybe, once it levels out, we probably have like half an inch left at the bottom of this. That is enough for me to give it a fresh feed, and I'll do that in class in a little bit, to regrow, not because I'm planning to use it tonight or anything, right? I'm making 2 loaves right now, but because I want to keep it active and healthy. So then what I'm going to do is just grab a spatula and I'm going to whisk my starter into my water to form just a milky liquid. This helps disperse it nicely. Now, the coolest thing about sourdough, you guys, if you aren't aware of this, is it's literally 4 ingredients and barely 4 ingredients. So we have our starter and our water in here, and now we're going to add our flour and then a little bit of salt, and that's it. Even if you go to the grocery store and you buy quote unquote sourdough bread, turn that label around and you'll see that it probably has 16 to 20 ingredients. So one of the biggest benefits of using sourdough in your home is it becomes highly digestible and it's much healthier for you, and you know exactly what's going in it. I just think it's magic. So let me grab my flour and let me talk about flour real quick with you. So you'll notice most all-purpose flours would work for this, okay? So for example, here's King Arthur brand, 11.7% protein content, which is pretty standard, and that's going to give you a pretty nice rise. You can purchase bread flour, which is usually around 13%. I wouldn't recommend you get into other flours for now. There's whole wheat, there's kamut. Those can be a little bit trickier to work with as beginners. Once you get your base in place, and once you get to know your kitchen and how long it's taking for everything to double in size, then you can start playing with other flours. But we're going to use just a standard all-purpose flour, and our recipe, if we look down at the sheet, is calling for 800 grams, because again, we're building 2 artisanal loaves right now, And we'll probably, us as a family of four would not go through two in time. So I always freeze one. Bring it to the bottom of the jar here. Something I don't want to forget to mention, I did put this as a tip in your notes. If you have stale sourdough, you can bring it back to life. Let's say you have an artisanal loaf sitting on your counter and it's gone a little bit stale after 2 or 3 days. You can add a little bit of filtered water to it. And I like to slice the loaf first and then just bake it at 350 for 10 minutes. And it's like brand new bread. Super cool little hack. Okay, so I'm adding my flour, 800 grams, and I want to be pretty precise here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it under my stand mixer. So if you have a stand mixer, you're going to put it on level 2 and you're going to allow the dough hook to bring your flour and water together for 2 or 3 minutes. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can absolutely use your hands, but it would be about 5 minutes or so. And that can become problematic over time. You can start to develop some carpal tunnel or arthritic symptoms just because it can get a little bit aggressive. But I do a little combination. So what I'm going to show you here is I've got my flour, starter, and water. I'm going to mix it together. And then after it has sat for about 10 minutes, I'm going to add the salt. I'll come back to that point in a second. So this is a process called autolyze. You'll see this in recipes where you just allow your dough and your water and your starter, your flour, your water, and your starter to come together before you add your salt. It helps to strengthen the activity of your dough by doing that. And we're just leaving it for like 10 to 15 minutes before we add the salt. So it's not long, but it's enough to give it a stronger start before you add your salt. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let this run now for 2 minutes or so. And while that's happening, I'm going to clear my counter and I'm going to move ahead right now to get this dough in the oven so I can show you guys how we do that. But let me walk you through what's going to happen. So this, after it has mixed, what's going to happen, and this might be where you want to think about your schedule at home. If you know that you tend to be home most Saturdays, let's say Saturday is a day where you like to do laundry and housework and you tend to be in and out of your kitchen most of Saturday, that would be the ideal day for you to be doing what I'm doing right now, because your bread is going to require a little bit of nurturing for the first couple of hours. So after it has come together in your mixer or you're using your hands to bring it together, for the next couple of hours, it's going to sit on your counter and you're going to want to play with it every hour for a couple of hours. So let's say you're working with the first 2 hours of your bread sitting. Come into your kitchen every 45 minutes or so and just pull that dough up and stretch it and start to build some of that activity. So I will show you that in about 40 minutes after it has sat. But what that's doing is it's helping to build strong activity in your dough. You're challenging it. It's like going to the gym and doing bicep curls. You're challenging, you're tearing down your muscle to help it grow stronger. That's what you're doing with your dough. If you did not do this step, if you just mixed this and let it sit on your counter, you would have a weak dough, which means when it goes into the oven, it wouldn't rise very well. It also probably would not do this. It probably would not double in size like you see here. So we want to challenge it in the first couple of hours that it's sitting on our counter. And that's why it's important that you're home. So that schedule I went through with you 10 minutes ago, where you pull your starter out of the fridge, you give it a feed, you build your leaven that you're going to use in your dough on Friday night. And then Saturday morning, you build your dough because you know you're going to be home. That's ideal because then you can stretch it, give it a little bit of love. And then it's going to sit on your counter and grow for this can be anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, depending on the warmth of your kitchen. So again, just like I timed my leaven that we just used in the bread, I timed it to be doubled in size by the time of this class. I did the same thing with this dough. I built them both this morning because I wanted them to be doubled in size. Okay, so pretend we've just gone into the future. So this dough here, pretend we made it this morning and it was sitting after I stretched it for a couple of times over the course of the first couple of hours. And then I let it sit for 4 or 5 hours. And now here we are. Okay. Are we all following? We're good? Okay. So I'm going to just clear my counter slightly because I want to show you what we do now. So truthfully, I have done all different approaches where with this, I stretch it out, which I'm going to show you right now. And then I put it in the fridge. Why do we put it in the fridge? Does anyone know? Kind of similar to why we might do that with our starter. Drop it in the comments if you know why we put this dough in the fridge after it has done its bulk fermentation. So bulk fermentation is the stage where it sits on your counter and doubles in size. The reason that we put it in the fridge is we want to retard the growth a little bit. Yes, stop the process. That's right. But what it also does is it continues to enhance the sourdough flavor. So any of you that have been baking sourdough, if you have found that it's lacking that sourdough flavor, it's probably because your dough could stand to ferment a little bit longer in the fridge without growing anymore. You don't want it to keep growing because it's only going to grow to a certain point. If I kept this going and I didn't bake it or stretch it out and bake it right away, what is it going to start doing? What are you going to see this start doing? If I left this out for another couple of hours, who knows? Same thing would happen with my starter. Yep, you got it. It would start to flatten. This would start to go backwards, which means when I go to bake it, it's going to be a flatbread. It's not going to rise. Okay. So we are right on schedule. We have our bread ready to go at the perfect time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my stand mixer. And you can see, I think you can see this from there, maybe, probably not too well. It's all stuck to the dough hook right now. I'm going to let it just sit there. It's all going to fall off the dough hook. And in 10 minutes or so, I'm going to add salt and mush it all together with my hands. And then it's going to sit for about 45 minutes until I give it a stretch. We're going to do a stretch and fold together before class ends. Like I said, we'll probably go to about 3:30, 3:45 today. Okay, so let me just keep recapping. So this dough I built this morning, it took 6 to 7 hours to reach this peak rise, which means it is ready to come out of here. And now we're going to do what's called laminating. So have this page open, guys, from your package, this recipe that says the double loaf recipe. So you can see here, I've given you really quick steps under the directions. If you go to the next few pages, I go in more detail on each of these steps. So if you turn to the page that says dough recipe at the top, it looks like this. Okay. Where we're at right now is the bulk ferment stage has just finished. So if you scroll down the page here where it says bulk ferment, so this has sat on the counter for a few hours after I gave it a couple of hours of stretching and folding, okay? And then when you go to the next one, you see shaping and baking your dough right here. This is where we're at right now. So we're going to plop this dough out on the counter and we're going to stretch it out. And keep in mind, this is a double recipe. So when I put this on the counter, I'm going to cut it in half. We still got people joining here. There we go. So I'm going to divide this dough in half, and then I'm going to do a process called laminating. And what laminating simply is stretching your dough out really thin until the point that it's about to tear, but you're going to try to not tear it. And what this does is it gives it further activation. So what I like to do when I'm starting is a nice clean counter. And this little shaker jar you can get on Amazon just has flour in it. I'm just going to flour the counter slightly. And then I'm going to grab two tools. These are tools I highly recommend you get. So the first one is more of a plastic malleable scraper because I want to use this to scrape all of the dough out onto our counter. The second tool is a bench scraper. Metal, can't move. We're going to use that when we actually shape. So first thing, this is quite heavy. I'm going to take my tool and I'm going to just grab the dough all around. So I'm trying to scrape out, coming out in a nice uniform shape. So again, this is 800 grams of flour. We've got a double loaf going on here. Let me angle our camera a little bit better. 1 second here. Back us up. Let me see. There, that's probably a little better. I feel so far from you. Okay. All right. So I've got our big dough here. I don't know if you can see from there. It's got some nice bubble action going on. I'm just going to eyeball it and take my bench scraper and I'm going to cut it in half. And I want these to be pretty uniform. Okay. So I've got two dough balls here. When I was first starting with sourdough, something I would always struggle with was when I put this on the counter, I would notice it was just so liquidy and very hard to work with. I could easily work with this right now with my hands and not get any dough really on my hands. This is how I learned over time that I had to adjust the hydration in my recipes because I have a warmer kitchen. Every sourdough blogger that I was grabbing recipes from online, they didn't live in warm climates, which meant all of their recipes had more water than what was ideal for my kitchen temperature. So again, this recipe I've given you, we're doing this class in the summer for most of us, which means it's probably the perfect hydration for your kitchen. But in the winter, you might want to increase it a little bit. You'll know when you need to based on how this feels. What you want it to feel like right now is just a real workable dough. Like it's not too sticky. Take your rings off. So let me put one of the dough balls over here. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to like hold it up kind of like pizza dough. And I'm going to let gravity pull it until it becomes elongated. Okay. And then you're going to grab one end and you're just going to kind of gently, this is called laminating. I'm just helping the activity strengthen. So it's kind of like stretching and folding. And you can get right under your dough. Now, laminating is helpful in recipes if you're wanting to put any mix-ins, let's say olives or nuts and seeds or cheese. Maybe you're wanting to make a cheese sourdough. This is the point that you would add that, okay? So you'd stretch your dough until it becomes more of a flat surface like this, almost looking like pizza dough. You'd layer your mix-ins here. You might do even like cinnamon raisin bread, right? You could brush a butter and cinnamon brown sugar situation all in your dough here, and then you'd roll it up into a ball. So what you're doing at this point is you're helping your dough relax a little bit. Something you'll notice as you get working with dough and specifically sourdough is initially it's going to act like a rebellious teenager when you lay it out. It's pushing back on you and everything you go to do, it's like rebelling. And what's going to happen though is it then starts to mellow out. It's like, all right, mom, I know you know what you're doing. I'm just going to surrender. Okay. So my dough here has surrendered. Okay. You can see now it's a little different than how it was in the beginning. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull it a little bit. I don't want to tear it. It's almost at the point of tearing. And I'm going to just grab it to the center. Almost like you're folding up a nice package. Same thing on the sides, right into the center. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's foolproof. There's no real technique, but sometimes I'll use a little more flour. Now, this is the point that I like to grab my bench scraper and I like to start grabbing it underneath because what I'm looking to do here is bring it into a nice, tight, beautiful dough ball. And you can use your hands to just get rid of any seams so it's more uniform. And you might want to just like, again, you're challenging your dough. There's no wrong thing here. You're just looking to spend like, a minute or two after you've stretched it out, bringing it into a nice ball. Because again, what's going to happen is because I'm irritating it right now, it is going to sit for a few minutes and relax. And then it's going to just mellow out a little bit, surrender a little bit more. And that's when I will pop it into what we call a banneton, because we're going to shape it. What that does is it just allows it to keep its shape. You don't have to use one of those. You could put it in a loaf pan if you want. At which point, if I wanted to bake this tonight, and actually I am going to bake this because we're doing a class, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop these into the fridge just for this class. I'm only going to put them in for like 10 minutes, just so that when I score it, when I cut the little, using my razor to cut a little line down the center, it's easier to work with. So here's one ready to go. The other one, I'm not going to bother laminating. I'll just show you that you can just play with it. And again, you're looking to just stretch out, get rid of any air bubbles. You're just giving it a little bit of activation. And then this one, let's just keep pulling and bringing into center. Again, there's no really right or wrong. You're just looking to stretch out any pockets and then bring it all into center. Okay. So any questions right now? So this dough has done its bulk fermentation on the counter. It rose. It can be baked right now, but if I wanted to get more of a strong sourdough flavor, then I would want to put it in the fridge for anywhere from 12 to 36 hours. So it's kind of nice because, to be honest, if you can just figure out your routine, and when you have a day where you're typically going to be in your kitchen and have some time to give it some love for the first few hours, you could do this, build your dough, and then you could decide to bake it tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow night, or even Monday. Oh, sorry, what's today? Today's Sunday. You could even bake it as late as Tuesday evening, right from the fridge. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility, right? Which is kind of cool. So this, I just want to, I want to pop into the fridge because what I'd like to do is put it into the oven in about 5 minutes before I score it. And we're going to talk about that in baking. So actually, maybe what I'll do just to show you the difference, I'm only going to put one in the fridge. So I'm going to leave one on the counter. I'll show you the difference in scoring versus one that's been in the fridge. Ideally, you guys, you'd want to put these into the, if you were wanting to bake tonight and you weren't giving a class, you would want to put it in the fridge for at least an hour. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is you can line your banneton with a towel or you can sprinkle it with flour. Rice flour is more ideal for sprinkling your banneton because it's going to cause your dough not to stick as much. I actually don't have any. I just used the last of it last weekend. So I'm just using all purpose and I'm just giving it a nice little coating. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is using my bench scraper, and one last time, I'm going to bring it into a really tight ball. And then I'm going to grab it and rest it in the bowl. Now, I'm just going to put a towel over this because it's just going in the fridge to kind of cool off a little bit so I can score it more easily. However, if if you were going to be putting it in the fridge for 24 hours, let's say, you want to make sure it is sealed really well. So what I would suggest you do is you either cover it really tightly with saran wrap or even saran wrap it and then wrap it in a plastic bag. Actually, I know most of I see Canadians on here. I know plastic bags are no more. So anyway, if you have some kind of airtight bag that you could wrap around it, maybe you save your bread bags if you have bread. Well, you're not going to be buying bread anymore, so you won't have bread bags. Poop bags. I don't know, but you just want to wrap it really tight. Okay. So that when it's in the fridge, there's no air getting to it. Because if you are going to allow your dough to go in the fridge for like 24 hours, if you don't have it really tightly wrapped, it's going to have a hard exterior and then it's not going to bake very nice. So let me pause here for a second. We've got our one dough ball sitting, just relaxing for a little bit. We've got our dough that we prepared to do a second round with. And I need to come back to this right now and add my salt, right? So you can see everything fell off the dough hook. Let me just come over. I just let it hang and it all fell off the dough hook. So now I'm going to, and this is just another hot tip, you guys, when you're working with sourdough or any bread really, soak everything as you go. So have your big bowl and just start throwing all of your utensils in here and start soaking it. Otherwise, it'll be a living nightmare to clean. Okay, so let that run. And then we have our second round of breads. I'm gonna have a lot of bread. I have a get together tomorrow night with a bunch of friends. I'm gonna be bringing multiple loaves of bread. I'm so glad we had this class together. So I have my dough here. You'll notice this dough is like, look at this, it just rips. Like there's nothing happening because it has not fermented and played together. So what I'm gonna do here now is I'm going to add, so your recipe calls for 15 grams of salt. So I'm just gonna eyeball this a little bit because I know that's a couple of teaspoons. Okay. Now, the other thing I suggest we do is you just have a little bowl of water here because what we're going to do now is, and again, I could have used my stand mixer to do this, but I'm going to use my hands. Dampen your hands a little bit. And I just want to squish that salt in with my dough. And I wish I had an overhead camera going on right now to help you see the process, but you can imagine. So I might just even to make it easier for you to see, water, just a little bit of water on your hands will help you deal with dough that has not yet come together. So I'm just massaging all of that salt in here. And then what's going to happen is this is our final product of ingredients. So it is going to sit here for the next 30, 40 minutes until I give it its first round of stretching and folding. So you're going to be able to see one example today in class. But then what I'll do after class ends is I will give it another 1 or 2 sets of stretching and folding just while I'm hanging out at home. I've got some laundry to do. I'm going to prep dinner soon, right? So I'm just kind of checking on it in its first couple of hours on the counter to make sure that it's starting to grow and develop nicely. And I'm going to keep challenging it, right? Okay, so this is ready to just now sit. This would be very hard for me to handle if my hands weren't slightly damp, not wet, but just a little bit of water. So this looks good. I'm going to just let this sit in the bowl. I'm going to cover it with a tea towel and it's going to sit on my counter. And in 30 minutes or so, I'm going to come and play with it again. All right, how are we doing? So let's check in on our stages. We have some bread ready to go in the oven, right? We've got one of the dough balls we left on the counter and one that we have in the fridge. And what we're going to do is we're going to, so I'm going to show you a couple of things. So first of all, because we're doing 2 loaves right now, I have 2 Dutch ovens that I'm going to be using. Now, some recipes, even the recipe I wrote out for you, if you have your dough in the fridge and you know you're going to be baking in like an hour, you might want to preheat your Dutch ovens in the oven just to give it that extra level of cook when your dough goes in here. I'm not doing that today. So I've got my one Dutch oven here. You need to use something that's going to prevent your dough from sticking. So I wanted to show you two different options. So I have a silicone sleeve, a bread mat, if you will. It's nice and easy. This basically replaces parchment paper, and I have those linked in the Amazon shop. Or you just grab a sheet of parchment paper. So I'm going to show you both ways. So first, let's look at our dough ball that we have on the counter here. So what I'm going to do once more before I put it into the Dutch oven and pop it in the oven is I'm going to bring the ball in a little bit tighter because it's relaxed a little bit while it's been on the counter. And what I like to do with my bench scraper is I use my hand on one side and I just come underneath it and wrap them towards each other. My hand comes towards the bread scraper. So the ball is getting tighter and tighter and smaller because once it goes in, and then sometimes I'll do this technique where I just cup it and I kind of slide underneath it, okay? Because once it goes into the Dutch oven, it's going to start settling and expanding a little bit. So I want to try to keep this ball nice and tight. So there it is. Now, because it did not go in the fridge, it's going to be a little trickier for me to cut a little indentation into it, which we call scoring. Does anyone know why we score artisanal bread before we bake it? You could technically use a knife for this, but you can buy little tools that come with razor blades. So the reason we're doing a little score is not just to make it look pretty. Yes, Kelly, it does help it rise. It creates that nice ear that bakes up, but it just helps some of the activity to escape as it's baking so that you do get a nicer rise. So if you didn't do that, it would just be trapped and it would still stay a little bit dense. So what we're going to do here is using and actually what I'm going to do is put it into so this is a much bigger Dutch oven than I actually need, but that's okay. So I'm going to use my razor. Let's see if I can show you this. And what I'm going to do is, actually, let me do this. There. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I just want to cut a line right down the middle. And I'm kind of like dragging it. And then I go over that line once more. And you can see what's starting to happen. I cut probably about 3/4 of an inch deep. And it's starting to spread a little bit. So if I hadn't done that, I'm sorry, if I had put it in the fridge, it wouldn't be spreading quite as quickly. But right now, that's a pretty good cut. I might cut just a little bit more. And then anything else you do is just going to create little fancy petals and different looks. So you might do a couple of little diagonals on the side. These will creatively show up in your end product. Okay, so they're functional and creative. So I'm going to pop that in, and the lid is going to go in when it goes in the oven, but I want to get my other one ready to go here as well. I have my oven preset right now to 450. And what's going to happen is the bread's going to go in two stages. It's going to go in with the lid on at 450 for 20 minutes. Then I'm going to take the lid off, drop the temp down to 425 for another 15 to 20 minutes. And then it's done. So total bake time is about 40 minutes. Okay, so I have my second Dutch oven here. And now what I'm going to do is set out a sheet of parchment paper. So my bread did not get to sit too long in the fridge, but it's just enough for me to be able to cut a little bit easier. And again, this could have sat in the fridge for up to 36 hours. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to dump it. If you had put it in bannetons, you're going to have a little coating of flour on top of your bread. And you can just kind of massage that out with your hands. I'll try to get residual flour off your parchment sheet because it will kind of burn. Okay, so now I'm going to I'll do a little bit of a different design on this one. I'm going to come down the middle. This one is much easier to cut, even though it's just in the fridge for like 10 minutes. And you could do like a little tree. Something I'm hoping I remember to show you is in between the two baking stages. So baking first at 450 for 20 minutes, and then I open the oven and take the lid off, drop the temp. At that point, I will often take the razor and I will give it another little bit of a deeper cut just to make sure it gets that really nice artisanal ear, we call it. Okay, so I'm just flattening out my parchment. I'm going to put these in the oven right now. Let me check our time. It's 3 o'clock, which means at 3:40, if we're still on together, I'm assuming we will. You guys might have some questions. I'm going to pull these out. They'll be ready to go. So let me put these both in. Set our timer for 20 minutes and we're good to go there. So I'll just do a little cleanup. Pop any questions you have into the chat right now. And really, the thing I want to emphasize, it seems like a lot of steps, but it's really not. As long as you can find a morning when you know you're just in the kitchen and you're hanging out with the family and maybe you're doing some laundry and things like that, you get into a nice rhythm with it. I had a lot of flops in my first year. And it was almost always because I had too much water in my recipes. Once I started changing that, and even with my starter, like when I'm building the leaven for the bread, I want the consistency of this to be really thick, really hard to move, because what that means is it's going to build a really strong starter. But again, if I was living in a colder climate, I'd want to have a little more liquid in it. It'd be a little runnier because I'm wanting to help it rise more because it's harder to get it to rise. Do you find that gluten sensitive people can tolerate sourdough well? I do. I do. You know, you've probably heard this before, but people with gluten sensitivities suddenly don't have gluten sensitivities when they go to Italy. You know, they're trying to kill us here. So you gotta get around it, right? So, you know, the thing is you can play with it. I personally I don't eat a lot of bread. I'm not sure if you find that shocking based on the amount of bread I make, but what I find is sourdough, it just digests so beautifully and tastes so good that you end up really enjoying what you're eating. So um, gluten sensitive people at some point have been exposed to a lot of GMO flours and too much. So, you know, having something that is beautiful and minimal ingredients that is pre-digested, sourdough is doing that for you. Sourdough is like a digestive system in your bread, the starter. So it's helping it that once it lands in your stomach, it's already had work done on it. Margaret said, I'm gluten-free and I went to Italy and fell in love with focaccia bread and pasta again. And no problemo. Yes. Gina said, when you take it out of the fridge to feed it on Thursday, does it go back in the fridge again afterwards or stay out until you go on Saturday? Great question. It does not go back in the fridge because we're actually wanting to get that activity going again. And your fridge is going to cause your activity to go dormant. So the reason we're taking it out of the fridge on Thursday is because we want to get that activity going again to be able to make bread on the weekend. If we put it in the fridge, it would stall all of that out. I have not worked with too many other flours, to be honest. Andrew asked about einkorn. I have used, in my first year, I was using kamut flour quite a bit. And I just came to not love how dense the bread was. A bread flour is going to be the easiest flour for you guys to work with. It's going to give your dough the best shot. An all-purpose flour or specifically an organic all-purpose flour, is going to be pretty good. Not quite as good as bread flour, but it's going to work really well. And that's what we use today. But I mean, that's the thing. You can play around with things and see how you like the flavor. You can use rye. I will sometimes put a little bit of whole wheat in my flours. Whole wheat can have a little bit of a higher protein content also. So the zero flour from Italy, a lot of pizza recipes will call for that. So I would definitely play with that in the pizza recipe. I haven't used it for bread. Higher protein flour is just going to give it a stronger activation. So if you are, again, in a colder climate, you're going to find that having a higher protein is going to work a lot better for getting a stronger activity, or, you know, I use the word gluten loosely, but that gluten activity that really brings the dough together. So playing with flours is fun with these recipes once you get your basics down. I would not suggest getting too many variables going in the beginning, guys. Like, work with an all-purpose flour, go get the 10-pound bag from Costco and start playing with it and get to know your kitchen, get to know the temperature of your kitchen and how that's impacting your rise time. Times are irrelevant when it comes to sourdough, only because the temperature is the biggest determinant of how long something's going to rise. So, like I said, for me, my kitchen is around 73 degrees. It's very hot outside. It takes 6 hours for my starter or my bread dough to double in size, which is a lot less than most recipes online would call for. I have not tried that, Kelly. She said, have you ever added water when baking or steam with ice cubes? I have seen that in recipes, and what that can do is it can create a little bit of a rise in your crust, so a little bit of bubble action. I haven't felt that I've needed that, but there's a lot of ways to get creative. Let me just, while we have a little bit of downtime, so just to catch you up, we've got 14 minutes left on the oven. The oven's at 450 Fahrenheit. I'm going to, in 14 minutes, I'm going to drop the temperature down to 425. I'm going to take the lid off, and our bread is going to be almost baked. The other thing I have going on is we have our second round of 2 loaves sitting here. And it's going to be ready for some stretching and folding in probably about 20 minutes. But the last thing I want to do is just talk about our starter that we took from, right? So this starter that we used in our bread recipe, what do I need to do to it? I took the majority of this out for our bread recipe. What do I need to do to this now? And I am going to leave this on the counter because I do a lot of baking through the week. I am going away on Wednesday for 10 days with the family, which means my starter, I'm going to feed it and then put it in the fridge the whole time we're gone. Yes, Kelly's right. I need to give it a feed. So I'm just thinking right now. So this is what I do in my head every night before bed. I think, okay, what am I making for dinner tomorrow night? And am I going to need any starter? And if so, and a lot of the things that I make do require some form of bread, whether it's, I mean, I have made pasta noodles, tortillas, biscuits, hamburger buns, hot dog buns, breadsticks. I mean, most meals could use a little bit of bread with them in some format. So what I'm always doing the night before is I'm looking at how much starter the recipe might need tomorrow. Quiche crust. I mean, it's endless, you guys. There's so many things that you can use your starter in. So that's what you're doing. You're giving it a feed every night. I personally like to feed it before bed so that it grows overnight. And then in the morning, it's at that peak rise, and I can use it to prepare that night's dinner. Most recipes, like let's say you're making hamburger buns for dinner, you would feed your starter the night before, and then the morning of hamburger night, you're building your hamburger bun dough in the morning, and it's going to need all day to rise to make those perfect little buns. So that is kind of the flow you want to come into, is every night thinking about your next day. So while we're waiting on that, let's just look through the rest of our package, and you guys can let me know if you have any questions. So those first couple of pages of your package go through the recipe in more detail. So I would take a little bit of time after class and just read through so you really anchor the learning and you know, because I'm showing you the stages and then you read it, it's going to help you integrate it a little bit easier. And then as we go on, I've given you some helpful tools. So here's a sheet here you might want to keep in your kitchen, which is standard sourdough conversions. Again, I highly suggest you use a scale because a lot of the recipes that you're working with, I mean, a lot of sourdough bakers will use grams in their recipes, but sometimes you'll come across recipes that use cups and teaspoons, and this is just a nice conversion chart you might want to put in a plastic sleeve in your kitchen. Before I get to recipes, let me just go through a few of the other pages. Okay. There's a tips section, okay, where let me just see if I've covered all these off. So we talked about tip 1, which is keeping your starter healthy, right? Removing half of it each day and putting it in your discard jar, and then giving it a fresh feed of equal parts flour and water. Tip 2, if you know you won't be needing your starter, give it a feed and then put it in the fridge for up to a couple of weeks. It could probably even go a month, to be honest. If your dough is too runny, okay, pop quiz. If our dough is runny, what has happened? Why is it runny? When we plop it on our counter and we need to bring it into a dough ball, what has happened if our dough just starts to come into a puddle? Anybody know? Too much water, exactly. And yes, Kelly, left it out too long. The longer it sits on your counter, the more that activity, bacteria is working on it, and it eventually fizzles out. Cool fact, one of the strains of bacteria in sourdough is the exact same strain of bacteria in breast milk. Guys, and your starter is typically called your mother, the mother of your bread. I'm just saying. All right. If your ambient temperature is warmer or colder than 68 degrees, the dough is going to take shorter or longer to rise, respectively. So we've gone through a lot of talk about temperature today. You will want to get to know how your temperature in your kitchen affects your rise time. So you're watching your dough. You're not watching the clock so much. You're looking for it to double in size. And then higher protein flour, like bread flour, will create a stronger quote unquote gluten and a higher rise. So looking for something that's around 12% when you're first getting started can be really helpful. The other thing you'll find is a link to a sourdough schedule. So if you want to follow that schedule that I went through where you're planning to bake 2 loaves on the weekend, this goes through with you what to be thinking of on Thursday, Friday, what Saturday looks like, what Sunday looks like, and then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I just gave you some tips on ways to use your starter or your discard, depending on whether you're keeping it on the counter or the fridge. This is a helpful one-pager that you might want to print. It just goes through a real high-level flow of the process of baking bread. So it's kind of what I've just gone through in just a one-pager. And then the last part of your package are recipes. So let me come a little closer here. So I mentioned this earlier. You will see recipes that will have discard in the title. What that means is this is a recipe that does not need an active starter because it doesn't need to double in size. It doesn't need to rise in any way. Like even I was just talking about hamburger buns. They need to rise a little bit. So we need active starter. Breadsticks, same thing. Something like a quiche or even tortillas, you could get away with just using discard because you're wanting, in the end, you're wanting something that's more of a flat product, right? So basically, if you have a favorite recipe that you use that you want to start using your discard in, a good rule of thumb is that you can use anywhere from up to half of your total flour content in that recipe you could use discard, but you'll want to drop the amount of liquids of the other things in the recipe. So if your recipe has milk, for example, um, or maybe it's using, coconut sugar instead of honey. So you want to just be mindful of your liquid total volume of your recipe, because when you're adding discard in, you're bringing in some liquid, right? And that could affect your overall product. So I would suggest that instead of just trying to use discard in recipes, that you find some recipes that have already been adjusted for the volume that your discard is going to bring to the recipe. So I've given you links to a bunch of my favorite ones, like scones, banana bread, muffins I make every single week. That's a really easy way to use up your discard because it requires a cup of discard. Chocolate cake, there's a really good recipe in here. And then recipes that require active starter. You guys obviously have the PDF version of this, so these are all clickable. I didn't print out every single recipe, but these are just some great ideas. So sandwich loaf bread, I would suggest you try making this week. It's really easy to make. It doesn't require any stretching and folding, and it's a quick 8-hour overnight rise. And then you just bake it the next morning. And my kids love that one. I make it every week. Tortillas I make every week. Pizza we have every week. Yeah, that's about standard. And then pancakes are really easy too. There's a good discard recipe for pancakes. And then the last part of your package, I did print out for you if you want to keep these in your kitchen. Those recipes I just went through, those most popular ones, because what I like to do is I just have a board on my, like a recipe book board, and I print out the recipes and I keep them in plastic sleeves, and then they're just always there, especially the things that I'm making every single week. So that's the package there. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do here is, just for the sake of time, because you guys are good on questions, so the oven has only 4 minutes left before I need to drop the temperature down. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take these out. I want to just show you what the first half of the bake cycle looks like. And I'm going to cut with my blade, a little bit of a deeper cut. And then I'm going to pop them back in. And unfortunately, you don't get to eat the bread. Why don't you live here? You could come on over. I'm going to have 4 loaves of bread tonight. Okay, so let me pull these out. They're going to be very hot, obviously. Let's put this in here for a second and show you guys what this is looking like. So right now it's still quite doughy. Let me see. So right now, there's not too much of an indentation happening. So this is why I like to do the second cut right around now, so that when it's finished baking without the lid, it gets a nice ear. Okay, it's going to rise even more. So I'm going to pop that in, and I'm going to do the same to the other one. Okay. This was the one that went in the fridge. I want to show you the difference because it was coated in flour. Okay, a little prettier, right? So the fridge definitely helps. And that only went in there for 10 minutes, remember? So if it was sitting in there, ideally for like 12, maybe 24 hours, so it's got a little bit deeper cut going on there. Okay, I'm gonna pop these in. I'm gonna drop my temperature down to 425 and adjust my timer. I'll do 17 minutes just because we pulled it out a little bit earlier. So again, we've had a couple of different stages going on. You would not have quite as much going on in your kitchen as I do right now, but we do have our second set of bread here that could probably use its first stretch and fold, and then that will be the end of class, because what's going to happen is I'm going to let this sit for another hour or so and give it another stretch and fold. And then it's just going to sit on the counter, lightly covered, for the next 6 hours. Tonight, I'll then shape them like I did with you, put them in bannetons, and put them in the fridge overnight, and I will bake these tomorrow. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I just want to get my little jar of water, have my hands a little bit damp. My dough has just been sitting there. And what I want to do with this is the first set of stretching and folding to build that activity. So I'm going to get my hands a little bit damp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab from underneath the dough. Let me do this on the counter just so you can see it. Okay, so imagine this is in my bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab from the bottom and I'm going to just lift it up. And it's pretty loose right now. See how much I can stretch it? What I want you to pay attention to is by the time I get around the other side, I'm barely going to be able to lift it. Even right now, it's already starting to pull back on me. It's starting to get rebellious. And that's what I'm looking for. I want it to start getting a little ornery. So we're pulling it up. Okay, and I'm going to do one more corner. And now you see how I can barely get it to stretch. That means this is now good to sit and relax a little bit. So what I love to do is I always love bringing it into a nice, tight, tidy dough ball. And honestly, there's no right way to do this. You could literally pull it up in the air and throw it down your counter. Like you're just looking to build that activity. Okay. So now I'm going to rest it in here. Rinse my hands. And then I'm going to cover it with my little tea towel. Sometimes I'll set a timer just so that I don't forget while I'm roaming around the kitchen, because that can happen. You know, and again, if you don't follow the steps in the beginning stages of your bread, you won't get a really strong rise. So you want to try to really get in that routine. And I would suggest you pick a day, like a Saturday, and you follow the steps. Just have your recipe right in front of you. Set timers for the first couple of hours to remind you to come and stretch and play with your dough. Then you let it sit for anywhere from 5 to 8, maybe even 10 hours, depending on the temperature of your kitchen. You're looking for it to double in size. You might want to use a dry erase marker on your bowl that your dough's in, just to mark off where it started so that you can easily see that it's doubled. Once it is doubled, you're either going to bake it or you're going to put it in the fridge and bake it the next day. Before you bake it, you would take it out of your bowl and you'd stretch it out flat. We call that laminating. At that point, you could do some mix-ins if you want, nuts, seeds, olives, cheese. Roll it into a tight ball, and again, decide to bake it or put it in the fridge. And that is sourdough. I don't want to just have dead air time for the next 15 minutes, but I will take a picture for you guys and post them into the Healthy Kitchen Facebook group just so you can see the finished loaf. But do you have any other questions before we hop off? Is the pineapple juice pretty necessary for making a starter from scratch? It is not. So it's actually a technique that really does help, because again, if you're, and this would probably be a good time for you guys if you're in, if it's summer where you are, to play around with making your own starter, because it'll happen a lot easier than in a colder kitchen, but the pineapple juice helps to activate it quicker. There's no taste of pineapple, by the way, in your end product. The enzymes just help to give it a good start. Margaret said that bowl that you used for the one in the fridge, what material is that made out of? So it's kind of like a bamboo. I don't know the actual material, but it's kind of malleable, very light. Good question. It kind of resembles a cross between bamboo and cork, but like I said, you can flour it. And it does not really matter. No, it does not. You could use an actual bowl. What you're looking to have is just have something that creates that shape. The reason a lot of bakers will use this is it does create that nice patterning as well. You can buy these with a design in the bottom, with like a flower or a tree or something, or a leaf, and then your bread will bake with that imprint on it. You're welcome. Amy, will we be able to watch a recording? Absolutely. So this is streaming into our Facebook group. At least it should be. I was not able to confirm at the start of it, but I did record this. So what I will do is I'll send this out to you guys through email, and I'll post the recording in the Facebook group so you have it. So when I was first learning 3 years ago, I took a class with a farmer out in Canada, and it was good. It was a little overwhelming because there was no like printables, and it was a bit all over the place. And so I found myself watching the class several times over the course of a month, just until it had really integrated. So, all of that was on my mind as I was creating the format for this class, just trying to think of like how to take you through the different stages so you could see it and read it. But it will be a lot easier once you guys do it on your own, because you're not going to have things at multiple stages, right? So you're just going right from step one right through to bake. And again, the least amount of time that you could make artisanal sourdough in is about 24 hours from start to finish. And a lot of that time is just rising and having it proofing in the fridge. But do try the sandwich bread this week, you guys. Get your hands on a starter. If you need to order one, you can order it off Amazon. I do have the link in the shop there. And then try the sandwich bread, because it is very easy, and work off from there. All right. Well, I wish I could invite you over, but I guess I'll just take this as the next best thing. It was so fun to hang out with you guys. And this recording should be in the Facebook group, or I'll post it out through email tomorrow. All right. Much love from my kitchen to yours. And we can use the group for any questions as you guys go. So I taught a live class last weekend, and it was so cute. It was a bunch of my mom friends here, and they were texting us. We were in a texting storm for like 3 days, because you kind of like, you get so nervous when you're first starting, and they forgot some of the key information. So if that's you, post into our Facebook group. I'll watch for it, and we'll make sure that you feel like you've got this. And you've got this. It's so easy. It's wonderful too. Your family will love it. They will love you even more than they already do. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Nice to have you in. Bye.